What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 214 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Over the last few days, I have been talking about various Transformers books, and today I'm going to talk to you about another Transformers book. This is Transformers, the IDW Collection, Volume 1. This is a massive hardcover that collects roughly the equivalent of 3 normal-sized trade paperbacks. And a fun little story before I get into talking about the book itself. A while back, well over a year ago, I had planned to do a series of videos on Transformers. Not just in the comics, but in all media. At the time, I considered myself to be basically as much of a noob concerning the Transformers as is humanly possible. I knew very little about the Transformers, so I wanted to do a series of reviews about the old cartoon series, about some of the newer cartoons, about the Michael Bay movies, about just about all of the comics that I could get my hands on, and I was going to do just a whole bunch of reviews. And with these big IDW collections here, I was going to do roughly 3 videos per book, because there's roughly 3 stories per book. For example, this one has the Megatron Origin miniseries, and then it has about 5 or 6 of the Spotlight issues, which I would have talked about all of those in one video, and then it has the Infiltration miniseries. I'm not going to do that here because this is the 365-day graphic novel review challenge, not the 365-day do a portion of a graphic novel review challenge. So this video and all the others that I'm going to be doing on the IDW collection of the Transformers books, they are going to be a little bit sketchy because I'm going to be talking about a lot of comics in a relatively short amount of time, but I'm going to do the best that I can. So starting with Volume 1, this book has a foreword at the beginning by Andy Schmidt, and that was written in 2010, which I believe was when this book was first printed, but the IDW Transformers stuff goes all the way back to 2006, I think. So these comics were first printed around 2006, or at least some of them were, but this particular printing of this book was first printed in 2010. Andy Schmidt, he was talking about how they weren't really sure what order to print all of these comics that they have here. He said at one point they thought about putting all of the comics in chronological order in terms of the events that take place. So if it happened 2 billion years ago, then we will print that first, and then if it happened 1 billion years ago, we'll print that next, and then we will just print them chronologically in terms of the events in the story. And then he said, but then we decided not to do that. And then he said they thought about doing it in publication order, which would mean if it was published first, then we will print that first, and if it was published third, then we will print that third. And then he said, but we decided not to do that either. So we decided to do a combination of the two. And this is what irks me about that foreword. He said, there is no good way to print these books. There's no right way to do it. And I thought, you idiot, yes, there is a right way to do it. And this always makes me mad whenever you have a situation like this where there's a whole bunch of stories and they are being told out of order in terms of the events and the way that they happen. For example, you look at the Star Wars movies or the X-Men movies, and you will have people who say, how should I watch these movies? Should I start with the prequels and then watch Rogue One and then watch the original trilogy and then watch The Force Awakens? Or should I watch them in order that they came out? So start with the original trilogy, then watch the prequels, then watch Force Awakens, then watch Rogue One. I always say that you should watch anything that is done like this, watch it or read it in publication order. For example, if you go to the X-Men comics and you read the Origin miniseries by Bill Jemas and the Kubert brothers that tells the early days of Wolverine's life, if you read that and then you go and read Giant Size X-Men issue 1, you're going to be very disappointed because you're going to go into that with the mindset that they had all of that stuff from the Origin miniseries in mind when they were doing these early Wolverine appearances in the mid-1970s, and they did not. I would much rather read it and keep it in mind this is what they had originally intended, and then find out that 40 years later they had a different idea in mind and they did this Origin miniseries. That's why I like to read things in publication order. So even if it's out of sequence in terms of how the events happened in story, that doesn't bother me. I would much rather see, okay, this is the story that came first, and then later, maybe they changed their minds. Maybe they decided they didn't like this thing in that first story, so they retconned it a little bit in this third or fourth story. I would much rather see them do that. So it was a little bit irksome in this foreword for Andy Schmidt to act like there's no good way to publish these comics. I think there is very clearly a good way to print these comics if you're reprinting them. So I thought it was really weird that he said there's no good way to do it and anyone could read them in any order. I think that's a little strange. Now, with the Spotlight issues, that's one thing, because any of those could take place at any time. In fact, one Spotlight issue might take place over a period of a very long time. It might not necessarily take place at one particular time period. It might take place over hundreds of years or something like that. I think we had something like that in some of the later collections. So I can understand with those if you're a little unsure where to print them, but I would have much rather they had printed or reprinted all these comics in publication order. Having said that, let me go ahead and get into the content of these stories. So we have the Megatron Origin miniseries, which isn't very good. Now, if you'll recall, in The War Within, which was a story from Dreamwave Publications, we had references to Megatron running a kind of underground fight club thing on Cybertron before the war broke out. And that's basically what we get to see here. We get to see Megatron as kind of a blue-collar guy who basically starts this big fight club thing, and he starts off as just an ordinary dude, and then he eventually kind of becomes the kingpin of this fighting rink, if you will, and then the war kind of starts with him and his inner circle from this fighting rink. The problem that I have here is the same problem that I've had with all of these Transformers stories, in that I still have no idea why the war is being fought. I don't really know why Megatron started this war. Is he power hungry? Does he honestly believe that the people that he is starting this war against are corrupt and he would be a better leader? I have no idea. And then later we see in some of these other stories that not only did this war tear apart Cybertron, but he is taking this war to other planets. We find out in the Infiltration miniseries, which I will go ahead and talk about that now, I guess, since that's a good segue into the Infiltration miniseries. We find out that the Decepticons have been going to these various planets, and they have these several levels of destroying a planet, just completely tearing it apart. And for example, in Infiltration, we are at Phase 2, or we are at Siege Mode, which is what they call it. And basically, they have different levels of tearing apart any society on any planet. We also find out that they are looking for something. They're looking for Energon. But that is not a reason why they started the war. At least that's not a given reason in the Megatron miniseries. I'm pretty sure they didn't mention it there. So I still don't like that we really don't know why these guys are fighting each other than that's how it was in the cartoon series, so we're going to have them do that here. I would much rather them create a reason for this war to be fought and then build off of that. You can still do stuff that's kind of similar to the way the cartoon did it, or the way some of the other comics did it from Marvel in the 80s, but I wish that they would at least create a plausible reason why this war is being fought in the first place. Why is this war being scattered throughout the entire universe? We know that the Autobots are going to these various places to try and stop the Decepticons from destroying all these places, but we don't really know why the Decepticons are doing what they are doing. Also, in the Infiltration miniseries, we get 3 human beings. We get a mechanic named Jimmy, his friend Verity, who is a pickpocket. She steals stuff, and then she acts like there's nothing wrong with her stealing stuff. And then we get this other guy. He's kind of like Teenage Mulder. His name is O'Ninen. I don't remember his first name. It's on the tip of my tongue, but I don't remember. And these 3 are okay. If you're comparing them to all of the other human beings who are point-of-view characters in every other version of Transformers media, these guys, I guess, are better than most of the others. They're more tolerable than Sam Witwicky from the Michael Bay movies. They are more enjoyable than Spike and Sparkplug from the 1980s cartoon, who were just completely bland and had no personality at all, but they are still a little bit annoying. Verity is incredibly annoying. She steals this really expensive computer thing, and then she jumps down everyone's throat, who basically confronts her and says, hey, you're a thief, you shouldn't steal stuff. And then this O'Ninen guy, he's just a little bit weird. He reminds me of Mulder, like I said. He believes in aliens and stuff like that, and of course he's right. There are aliens on Earth. There's not much to his character other than he believes in aliens, and then he's ready to take the fight to the Decepticons when he finds out what the stakes are. And then this Jimmy guy, there's not much to him either, other than he's friends with Verity. I don't really know why they brought him into the story, because he doesn't really add that much. He helps fix Ratchet, who was kind of busted up by some of the Decepticons at one point, but he doesn't really do much beyond that. Speaking of Ratchet, remember when I was talking about The War Within Volume 2, that the big failing of that story was that it could not find a single protagonist to focus on and show the events of this war through their eyes. I love about Infiltration that we are doing that with Ratchet. We don't even get to see Optimus Prime in this book until the very last page of Infiltration, and I liked that. Even though I did say in my review of the War Within Volume 2 that I like the ideals and the crash of ideals between Megatron and Optimus Prime when there are ideals in this war. I like getting to see Megatron and Optimus Prime be the center of this conflict, but if you're going to take Optimus Prime out of the story, then I want to see you focus on one of the lower ranking members of the Autobots, and we get to do that here with Ratchet. Ratchet is a character, I don't know if there's been anything done with him in any of the other Transformers stories. I seem to vaguely recall seeing him in the cartoon series from the 80s, what I remember of Season 1, but overall, I don't think that there's been a lot done with him until the IDW comics here, and I'm really glad that he is the focus of this. Ever since the 2007 Michael Bay movie, 2007 or 2006, I can't remember, but ever since that one, Bumblebee has always been the Transformer that you focus on if you're not going to do something with Optimus Prime. And I'm really glad that, nothing against Bumblebee, but I'm glad that we get to focus on other Transformers besides Bumblebee. He's here, he or she, that's something that they touch on much later in this series where the Autobots don't actually have gender, but Ratchet has this holographic avatar, if you will, that's a man, and Bumblebee has a holographic avatar that's a woman. So Bumblebee may be a girl for all I know, I don't know, but later on they say that almost all of the Transformers do not have a gender one way or the other. But anyway, I'm glad that we get to focus on Ratchet. We get to see his relationship with the other Autobots, and even though all of these guys are on the same side, they don't always all agree with each other. And we got to see a little bit of that in The War Within, but it's explored even more here. And it feels a little bit more deep and a little bit more involved here than it did in The War Within. In The War Within, it was basically just, we don't trust this guy because he's very new at his job, and then they eventually come to trust him. Here, it's a little bit more complex than that, and I like that complexity, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing more of that here. Also, this miniseries introduces a organization called the Machination, I think is what they're called. They are seemingly a group of humans. They are sinister. That's about all that we know about them. And at the end of this, they find out that there are Transformers, and they know where they are. We don't really know anything about those guys, and presumably more will be delved into them in the next hardcover collection. We do get about 5 or 6 of the spotlight issues. I think that is a really good way to get someone like me slowly immersed in the world of Transformers. Reading these spotlight issues allows me to become familiar with some of these characters, because let's be honest, there are way too many Transformers characters. There's like 200 of them. You look at the cartoon series, the entire reason that that cartoon existed was to sell toys, and not just a few toys, but a whole bunch of toys. And if you have a really successful cartoon, which is basically just a 20-minute toy commercial, then you're going to make a whole bunch of toys so that you can sell more of them. So they had a whole bunch of characters in the cartoon series, and this comic is not shying away from using a whole bunch of those characters. You've got a whole bunch of Megatron people, you got a whole bunch of Optimus Prime people, there's a whole bunch of characters on both sides, and so it's really difficult jumping into the series trying to keep up with who all these people are. Like, it's hard keeping Prowl separate from Ratchet or something like that, or Ironhide. It's really difficult trying to keep all these characters separate, because just looking at the Infiltration miniseries, Ironhide isn't much different from Prowl. Prowl has a little bit more screen time, but there's not much of a difference between these characters. I like the spotlight issues because it gives me an opportunity to see a little bit about Soundwave. I get to learn a little bit about this guy. Yes, he's a Decepticon, but he also has his own mission that he's doing that separates him from, say, Starscream or some of the other Decepticons. I don't remember any of the other Decepticons other than Starscream and Megatron, but I really like getting to see Cliffjumper. He's a little bit short, and they kind of make fun of him for that, but then his specific thing is that he's really good at stealth, and he's really good at taking out Decepticons. I like that we get to focus on some of these guys, and we get to see where they're coming from in this war. And I like that we will keep getting some of these spotlight issues that will slowly get me introduced to some of these characters. Now, the further we get in, it may become more and more difficult for me to keep up with all of these characters, but some of these characters I still remember, even though it's been a while since I've read some of these IDW collections. So I really like that we got to see these spotlight issues that slowly introduced me to the world of Transformers instead of just throwing 30 Autobots into the Infiltration storyline. So that's about all that I have to say about the IDW Collection Volume 1. I know this was a lot to take in. Hopefully, starting with my video tomorrow where I talk about the second one, I won't be talking quite as much about it. I'll just be jumping right into it. But those are my thoughts on this book. Overall, I would say if you are looking for a good place to start with the Transformers, I would say that this book is 2/3 of the way on its way to being really good. The Megatron miniseries, it's not so great. The Infiltration miniseries, it's pretty good. It's still not perfect. Still, I got some problems with the how and why of this war and why it's being fought, stuff like that. But it's also really interesting. We get to see a very clever side of the Decepticons that we usually don't get to see. They're not just blasting onto the planet and then killing anything that they see. There is a method to their madness that I really like that we don't really get to see in other Transformers media. And then the Spotlight issues obviously are awesome. So those are my thoughts on the hardcover collection volume 1. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with another video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.